You're getting really emotional there a minute ago.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Because I don't want to let you down.
Thank you. It was really beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. And in that, if you let me down, what would happen?
I just don't want to do that to you because you don't deserve it. Regardless of what happens to me or to our relationship.
Oh, I didn't actually mean it that way, but
yeah, it's to me, it's that you deserve better than that. Being let down. And am I going to let you down over the course of this relationship? Of course I am. And I trust in both my and our ability to repair. But to me, that is real love in a lot of ways. It's just wanting the best for the other person, regardless of your role in their life.
Welcome back to Love and Practice. In this episode, we are talking about what happens when the strong, independent woman meets the man who feels like he has to hold everything together.
We share a real conversation from our marriage about our agreements, what each of us brings to the relationship, why some of my contributions feel more intangible, and how that can trigger old stories of I'm not enough or I'm not really valued.
We also go into how both of our protectors were shaped by being raised by single moms and growing up with fear-based stories about men, money, and dependence.
We unpack the difference between full feminine expression and emotional dumping, and between healthy leadership and control, and what it actually looks like to move from independence to real interdependence.
Then you'll hear how we use curiosity instead of criticism and practices like emotional validation and the keys to reconnect and keep choosing each other.
Let's dive in. I'm Emily Goff, a relationship coach. I've spent years exploring how we connect to grow and heal in love.
And I'm Kelly Gardner, an embodied leadership coach and communications consultant. Love isn't theory, it's practice.
This is Love and Practice.
Let's grow this.
So, Emily, we were having a conversation just yesterday on the way home from one of our favorite people, our third party that gets to hold us in our relationship. And in that conversation, we talked a little bit about our agreements in relationship. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you saw that conversation and what came up for you in that.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's important to give a little bit of background. So you and I had agreed early on, we made an agreement that when we got married, we were going to create a set of agreements and expectations around what we expected from the other one in relationship, what we expected from each other, and revisit that annually, because neither one of us wanted to have a relationship where things became stagnant, complacent, the things that often happen in long-term relationship. And it just felt like I did request that we not do the agreement revisiting like on our actual anniversary.
That's right.
Just in case things came up. I'm like, can we just enjoy that day?
And like a classic man, I had this great idea. And then a year later, I was like, I did what? Oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
So what we were trying to really hammer down at the time was what each of us were bringing to the relationship. And that relationship, not the relationship, that conversation at the time felt a little bit triggering for me, because it sort of felt like one of my protectors was coming up, because one of my core wounds is around not feeling good enough. And the conversation started to feel, not through any fault of yours, just how it started to press on my own wounding, was around, oh, I need to prove myself to you. I need to prove myself in this relationship to be good enough to be in this marriage. And we worked through it. It actually wasn't a huge conflict. I just noticed and communicated to you, I'm feeling some things come up here. But we really had ultimately it was a really beautiful conversation around what each of us bring. And so before I kind of share...
Well, actually, before we get into that, I want to go back just a little bit.
I know, because I'm like, I want to go more into that to give yesterday's conversation more context.
Well, yeah, but I think this piece of you said my protector came up and not being enough. And I think that's particularly in the masculine and feminine dynamics traditionally, right? There's a lot of expectations or let me put it this way, that oftentimes the feminine role is not valued by society as much as the masculine role, right? And looking at, air quotes here, the traditional roles, when we think about, we'll talk about the traditional roles, the trad wife and all of those kind of ideas, right? That this, this is a space where there's a historic misalignment in terms of the value that's given to those two different roles. So just starting out from that point, there is, this question of what is the value given to the things that I bring, right? And so from that conversation, there's also the, not feeling like what I bring is enough. And can you kind of say a little bit more about what that was for you in terms of, what was coming up for you, saying, what I bring isn't valued? What did that look like in practicality?
Yeah, I think that what was being pressed on was that what I bring feels more intangible, significantly more intangible. You were putting on the table physical protection, protection in a variety of forms, but especially physical protection. Financial support in terms of caring for the household, providing. Those are much more, yes, we can get into the nuances of what that means, but ultimately that is, to me, seems much more tangibly defined. What I was bringing, it felt difficult to even describe to you in terms of emotional support, my heart, like bringing my heart to our home, what I can create for you, for us. And I still actually have some difficulty describing it, which is what we were talking about yesterday as well. And interestingly, yes, historically, what women bring has not been as valued. But if we go back even farther, what women brought was highly valued. And then we went through a period, like women were sought out for their unique role, their wisdom, particularly older women, which now our elders are often discarded in this society that values youth over everything else. There's just so many things that have shifted in that regard. And then we went through a period historically, someone who knows more about the specifics of that could describe it better than me. But we ended up getting to a place where now, for a very long period of time, the masculine role has been more tangibly able to be defined and valued. And now we're in sort of this hustle culture and these structures that are in place. What I'm seeing now is the strong, independent woman that I was raised as, that so many women I know were raised as. We're actually now trying to dismantle that a little bit while still hanging on to our sense of autonomy and personal power, but also trying to soften at the same time. And what the fuck does that even mean?
Yeah.
And how do we get there?
It's interesting that idea, the strong independent woman, right? Where does the strong independent woman exist in relationship, right? It's like, I'm literally defining myself as independent.
Right.
When ultimately our goal in relationship is to find interdependence. And so how does the independent individual, and for the masculine, we are taught very early on that is our value, that our independence, our ability to go out in the world and slay the dragon and come back and feed the community, that is our value. And traditionally, we go back to, if we're going back to, caveman, early humanoids, we had the division of labor in the hunter-gatherer versus the word I'm skipping my brain right now. That the woman would the women would stay home, take care of the community while also harvesting food and preparing food, right? And so there was a variation in those roles and those responsibilities based on physicality, right? But even in that, we weren't really independent. That is the lie that we've all been fed, is that we were incredibly interdependent, and that's the survival and the thriving of our species is based on our interdependence. So this independent ideal is relatively new. And obviously, as a man, I feel very strongly this sense of independence. And we'll get into that, I think, a little bit more in terms of how that plays out in terms of a dynamic. But, where does the strong, independent woman live within a relational dynamic? And how is her role valued, undervalued, or even relevant?
I think that she has a place. And again, to give it some context, I was raised by a single mother, for the most part.
As was I.
Yes. And she had to figure it out. She had to be the independent woman. That was not an option that was given. She didn't have any other options. That was the situation. And my grandmother, who was happily married, so my mom's mother, both of them, even though my grandmother was happily married to my grandfather, both of them instilled in me from a really young age, make your own money. Make your own money, be able to hold yourself.
And why?
Because there was a sense, I think, underlying it of not only personal responsibility of just taking ownership for yourself, being able to stand on your own 2 feet, and the pride in being able to do that, because not much longer before that wasn't even possible for women.
Absolutely.
But underlying it, I think there was also a lot of fear. It's a lot of fear underneath that.
And that fear is saying what? What's the
that
story?
You can't depend on a man.
Yeah.
You cannot depend on a man to take care of you. So if he leaves, you better be prepared.
Yeah.
And it's great to have him in your life. I have, I tell this story. I've never told this story publicly, but I was also kind of raised by another mother. It was my best friend's mother at the time.
Also a single mother.
Also a single mother, yes. And she had 4 kids, and her daughter still remains one of my closest friends. And they are my second family. They're amazing. And their mom, I remember being like 15, and I was at my girlfriend's house, and her mom came down the stairs, and I remember this so vividly. She had like a glass of wine or something in her hand, and she's like, "Girls, I just want you to know that men are like earrings, that they're pretty to have, they're nice to have, but they're really not necessary." And I remember coming home and saying something to my mom about that, and she was like, "What? She told you what?" Because even though my mom was still instilling in me this strong, independent woman, she didn't want to put me off men either. And neither did my other, adopted mom, really. But she was, again, it was this fear-based story that had an undercurrent throughout my entire childhood of, you can't trust men.
And if you trust men, they'll let you down.
Exactly.
And they'll leave you.
They will leave, and they will not just leave, they'll leave you in a really bad spot. Yeah.
And at being a man who also grew up with a single mother, as a lot of my generation did, there is a lot of shame embedded in that, in the story that my mother subconsciously communicated, which is, and, my mother never said a negative thing about my father. She left it up to me to figure out all of the,
So did
the
mine,
challenge.
yeah.
But underneath there is, when someone once told me, the same brain that put a man on the moon has nothing to do all day but try to figure you out. So when you think about your children and their ability to study you and learn from you, whether you're saying it consciously or unconsciously, they're picking it up. And so I was certainly picking up these stories that men can't be trusted, and that they are going to leave you in a bad situation. And to see the pain that my mother went through, then I became very hypervigilant. That I would never be that, right? And as a young boy going around, we make these decisions. We say, I'm going to be this, I'm not going to be that, I'm not going to be this, I'm going to be that. And so, being someone that people can depend on became a very important identity for me early on, right? And it became a protector in many ways, because as long as I was somebody that people relied on, then I wouldn't be left, right? And we'll talk more about the protectors as well, but it goes both ways, right? So, having grown up with this story of, what a man, what happens when you rely on a man, led to, very strong identities for both of us.
And I just want any women listening, I think most of a larger majority of our listeners are women. And I just really want women to hear what you just said.
Mm.
Like, just let that sink in, because I spent so much of my life and sometimes still fall into that trap and have to consciously pull myself back up of getting wrapped up in my own fears, my own stories, and not recognizing what my partner has gone through as well. And what a lot of men also have gone through, to actively dismantle the story that you also have been given in a different way. And it's really important to recognize that. And that is a really beautiful way to start developing compassion for the person sitting across from you, and start to recognize how you became the way that you are, and recognizing that we're both just trying to dismantle these stories that started us on this journey.
Yeah, we were talking about this yesterday, in our conversation, in terms of what it means to be a man, or just a human being. Let me put this as not just a man thing. It's, I'm talking about man in terms of the traditional masculine, feminine roles, and we're going to get into how that kind of falls apart in relationship. But to be the person that everyone relies on, and that if I take on that role and that responsibility, and I took that role and responsibility on early because I saw that it wasn't there in my family. Being raised by a single mother, I didn't see the person until my teenage years. I would say I didn't see a person in my life that was going to take care of things, and so. My mom was telling the story the other day of when we had our first hurricane, and I was, organizing everything in the pantry, and decided, where everybody needed to be. And I was 7 or 8 years old, that I took on that role very early on, and above the neck, it looks like I'm calm, cool, and collected. And that was what was needed in order to be the person that people rely on. And so I learned at a very early age that as long as I appeared cool, calm, and collected, that I would be the person that people could rely on. And in every situation throughout my life, I was always that person. And what we fail to see is that below the surface, that's not what it really looks like. I'm freaking out. I'm concerned. I'm worried. But I don't give myself the luxury of allowing people to see that, because if they did, they wouldn't trust me, and I wouldn't be the person that they could rely on.
Mm-hmm. And the amount of insight that gives me into you is really powerful.
Have you ever noticed that kind of conflict that you have with your partner, how it feels different than with anyone else? Like no one else can quite trigger you quite the same way.
It is so true. We tell ourselves if they just stop doing that, everything would be fine. But what if it's not actually really about them?
Yeah. What if it's actually about what they awaken in us? You see, we don't choose our partners randomly. On some level, we choose people whose patterns mirror the very wounds that were waiting to be healed.
That's why the same fights keep coming back, not because you're broken, but because life is giving you another chance to grow.
Exactly. And that's why we created the Relational Compass. It's not a quiz, it's a tool that helps you to see why you react the way you do and what's underneath those reactions.
Helps you find your true north, the place where you can respond instead of react, and connect instead of defend.
You can take it for free at lipcouples.com/compass. It takes just a few minutes, but it might change how you understand every relationship in your life.
The other piece of that conversation was looking at my role in our relationship. And, in previous relationships, I was the one who often rolled it down. I played the strong, independent woman card a little too well. To the point where I had so many walls up, no one could actually access me, but God damn it, I was holding it down and taking care of shit. And that never really worked out well for me, and I never felt held.
And let me just, before you go forward, what did that look like when you played that role in your relationship, when you were the one holding it down? How did that lead to your relationship with your partner? What did that create as a dynamic in your relationship?
Well, for one thing, he didn't feel trusted, and it turned into a mother-child dynamic because I didn't give him autonomy, because as long as I held the power and control in the dynamic, I felt safe. And what did he do? He went out and did other things that ended up really harming me, but only because he was just trying to have autonomy in his own life, and I wasn't giving it to him in our relationship. And that didn't work.
Yeah.
So then I got into this relationship, and there was this exhale. Like, oh my God, I can actually. And there was some struggle with the exhale and the choice to exhale. I remember very early in our relationship, you had a moment and you're like, oh, you're used to sitting in my seat in the relationship. And I'm like, yeah, I am. And this seat is fucking foreign to me, and I don't know what to do with it. So it has been a journey. It sometimes still continues to be. There are still aspects of me that if I'm trying to create safety for myself, I'm trying to not lead, but take control. And there's a difference in terms of strong, healthy leadership is not controlling. And that's a really important differentiation, I think, for people to
What do you think
recognize.
strong, healthy leadership looks like? How can we play that out for the listeners?
I'd love to give like a real life example. But I think that ultimately it's even when you, for example, book a date for us. You,
I'm laughing because usually you have to bring that up for me.
oh, not always. No, not always.
Okay.
Not at all. You often still do that. But you will, for example, you'll go research the different options, and then you will ask me about which options I prefer, but you're not giving me 10 options. You're giving me like, 2 or 3. You'll let me know which ones you think might be better and why. And then you ask about a particular day and time of the week. You're not putting it in my calendar. You're not for me without any regard to my own schedule. You're not, you're taking my needs and desires into consideration, and yet you're still taking the lead and not just going, I don't know, what do you want to eat tonight? So to me, that feels like an example of healthy leadership.
Yeah. So it's not knock you over the head caveman style, drag you in and say, okay, here's what we want. And this is, we're tapping on the door of this conversation that I really want to have about the masculine and feminine dynamics, which is, this idea of, in the polarity world of having a masculine take charge man. I think you were saying something around this topic earlier. It's like everybody wants one until.
What did I say? You're going to remind me.
Oh,
yes. Oh, everybody wants one until you live with one.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's one thing to have that, and I don't even go deep into the polarity stuff because I think that it's far more nuanced and it sometimes gets portrayed, but I'll just use it for the sake of this. Everyone wants the polarity in the bedroom and like the strong masculine man and all the things. But then you realize that you actually live with this man, and that polarity creates a friction that is hot in the right context. Other times in day-to-day life, it's really fucking frustrating.
Yeah.
It's like, how do we learn to coexist with each other while still maintaining the polarity that I love so much in this particular realm? But I'm like this, flowy feminine woman, and you're this masculine, and there's so much overlap there. I'm not just trying to paint either one of us as one or the other, but it does create a certain amount of friction that can be difficult to navigate.
And like you were saying before in your relationship, you taking control is being a mother, and you don't want to live with your father.
No.
And I certainly don't want to fall into that role of being the father. And so there's a difference between, taking charge and completely disregarding the needs and values. And, that's even when we talk about doing it in the bedroom. I mean, I think one of the things that's misunderstood about the concept of dominance or, of doming is that what the goal of the the dom role is really to understand the desires, the wants, the needs of the other person, and to try to fulfill them as best you possibly can. That's actually what we're seeking to do. And so it gets really hot in the bedroom when you're kind of intuiting and guessing, but in relationship it requires some communication. You can't just assume that you know what your partner wants. You have to have those conversations. We have to really be open to that. And so, there's one part of the conversation, but the other piece of this conversation that I really wanted to get into is this idea of, the value of the full expression of femininity in the relationship versus in the romantic space, and how that plays out, as it was part of our conversation yesterday.
Yeah. Okay. This is juicy, because I do see, not in the circles that I run in personally or the circles that I run, but I do see a lot of this with this sort of shifting belief that women feel that their full expression means their full feminine expression means being able to, this isn't how they would describe it, but essentially dump their emotional bullshit onto their partner. And that he should be able to be stoic and grounded and just breathe through it and be able to take it. And that is also what defines a strong masculine man. I have some issues with this. At the end of the day, the goal to me is to be a mature adult. I don't care whether you're masculine, feminine, non-binary, anything in between. You do whatever you want to do. A mature adult is able to regulate themselves. Yes, co-regulation is also beautiful. It's necessary part of being human in so many ways. But being able to exercise containment, which is something that I am still learning in more subtle ways too. But I do not there is no part of me that takes pride in me being an emotional mess and then coming at you, which has happened, as we know, and throwing it at you and including unconsciously judgments and everything else at you, and then expecting you to just take it. There is no part of me that holds any sense of pride in doing that, nor do I identify that as being my full emotional expression.
Yeah.
That's me. That's my inner child coming out to play and throwing a tantrum.
And let's be honest, though, right? Which is, no one really thinks that they're being their little child when they're being their little child. We all think that we're being, my brain takes over and says, there's a perfectly legitimate reason why I'm acting this way. And that's, I have a strong emotion, and my brain, I often say, is a wonderful servant to a terrible master, which is going to come up with all of these wonderful reasons why it should look the way that it is. And I'm justified in acting this way. And so I don't think anybody in that moment is going to say, oh yeah, I'm acting in my child, and I'm, there's perfectly good reason. And I'm mad for a really good reason. And this is my full expression. In that moment, I may be saying that, because I'm going to put you on the spot here, because when we had this conversation originally around what our roles and responsibility were, I came and said,
a year ago, you mean?
Yeah. A year ago, I came and said that, this is going to sound really odd for me, but I do want to take on somewhat of a traditional masculine role. I want to take responsibility for providing for our needs as a family, and in that kind of way, that's something that feels really good for me. Getting back to like the practical, what does that mean? And also, creating safety both physically and emotionally. Part of that conversation, you said, well, I'm here to bring the fullness of my feminine expression, which I think over this year we've been kind of unpacking, what does that actually mean? And there were many conversations, arguments along the way where, there was this conversation of, is my full feminine expression not welcomed? And I think there's something very specific around, I'm only welcomed if I'm happy.
Yes, that has come up for me several times because I am starting to really differentiate between what that means.
Mm.
Because my view at times has been not because I want to bring you my other stuff, by the way. It's human and I recognize that it is going to happen. I'm don't live in a bubble and it's going to happen sometimes. But I have taken our conversations sometimes to mean that you only want me if I'm happy and joyful and bubbly, and uh that's what partnership means to you. And I don't feel that way fully, but there have been moments when I have perhaps been a little bit dysregulated where I have wanted to understand what that actually means to you. Because yeah, if I'm fully regulated, now regulated does not mean happy,
Mm.
but I have crossed wires on that sometimes, thinking that you only want me the most, or really at all, if I'm happy and joyful and alive and free and whatever. And that feels incredibly limiting to my human experience.
Hmm.
So I would love to hear what that actually, like what you're actually looking for, what that actually means to you.
Well, yeah, I would say that it's regulated. That's that would be the key term for me. And so I think that we can all get angry, we can all get sad, we can all have all of these emotions. But is the question, is the mature adult present in having these emotions, or is it the wounded child that's present in having these emotions? And I'm not aware in that moment. Something that I often deal with is there are many moments where I have protected myself as though I was under mortal fear for my life. And when I stepped back, at that moment, I was like, I got to fight for my life, and it felt real. And it felt that this is valid, that I am fighting for my life. But when I step back and look at it, I'm like, this really wasn't that big of a deal. And it's not that, but when I look at it even deeper, it's connected to something that I have a deep wound and fear around, and I am protecting myself from having to experience that again. So that's what I'm really fighting for. And so in those moments, I'm not regulated, I'm dysregulated. And so um, uh, I think it's important for men to recognize that when we're seeking out a feminine partner, we're not seeking someone who's like us. And there's a reason for that. Right? If we're and it's rare that that we have a masculine partner getting together, regardless of gender. There tends to be a polarity between that, and then the question is why? Why do we seek out this strange other? And I think that's something that really baffles men. We understand it at the beginning, like, oh, she's so beautiful and lovely and vibrant and all of these things. And so I see how it's easy for a woman to go, oh, he only wants that aspect of me. There's something about this dangerous feminine that we are attracted to. There's something about this, what I would often say is just this connection to feeling. That this emotional ability, the ability to actually feel and be present with that, in many ways is foreign and exciting and different and new. And then we have it in the home and we're like, whoa, that's way too much. you know and so the way too much is the dysregulated aspect. It's the little girl fighting for her life, just like my little boy is fighting for his life. And what I'm saying is, I don't need that. I'm okay without that. Though it's going to be present, I don't want to put it on the table as this is what I bring to the relationship. And I see that happening, in relationships a lot, where I'm with men who are with. I have men in my men's group who are experiencing this with their partners, expressing, this is my feminine expression. And we're going, this isn't what I'm asking for. This isn't what you're giving to me. This isn't the trade-off. This is just another thing that I have to find a way to lead through, to be present with, this is another weight that I'm carrying. If the idea is that as the masculine, I'm supposed to be this container for your full feminine expression, that's just me holding a lot more weight. And if that's what you're bringing, that's what you're putting on the table, that doesn't sound like a good balance.
So what does your ideal, and I can't ask you to speak for all men, but in your specific instance, I would love to hear how you think, and a little bit based on what you hear. You work with so many men so closely in terms of what you value from a feminine partner. Because yes, who is this strange other being who is so different from me? And Alison Armstrong, I think we may have referenced this once before. Alison Armstrong talks about the issue being when women look at men as a larger, hairy, misbehaving woman,
Mhm.
and then we give them shit for it. But it works both ways. So if you're looking at me like I'm a smaller, less hairy man, and I'm misbehaving, what is it that you are looking for?
That's a really good question, and one that's very difficult to answer because I don't think that mm, on the surface that we're consciously aware of what that is.
Yeah.
It's like I fell in love. Love's a feeling, and that tells me, that brings something up for me. But I generally didn't look at my partner and go, well, my cost benefit analysis is that this person has this quality, that quality, and not this quality, and therefore this is what I'm choosing. And that's where it gets really difficult. Because that's how I'm used to making decisions. I do the cost benefit analysis. I
Very
break it all.
logical, rational.
Very rational thing, right? And that's where women are not hairy, misbehaving men that are irrational. And that gets confusing. It gets annoying. It gets, because I want this to be a rational thing, but it's not my rational self that's making this decision. It's my irrational self. And so, uh, I think that there's a part of me that really is just looking for a deeper access to my own emotional space. As I was saying before, it's like, and I'm a guy who cries all the time. That I cry at the drop of a dime. It's not that I'm callous or I have a lack of connections to my emotions, but there is this, I think, particularly in connection to joy. And I think that's where it gets misconstrued, is that I only want that part. But that's the one thing that I don't have. The one thing I see in you that is so foreign to me, the way that you just laugh at all of, the most random things. And it's like, how do you take that much joy out of this little, you literally stop and smell the flowers. There's a joie de vivre, a celebration of life that is not as present in my life. And so that's the outward thing that I can look at and say, wow, that's something special. That's something that I want for myself. That's something that, on some level, we all take on a partner thinking, ooh, look at that quality they have. If I bring them into my life, I'll too have that quality. Not always the best approach, but yeah, I'd say that, from a conscious standpoint, there's that part that I'm looking for. I'm looking for that connection to emotion.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that for me, some of the ways in which I'm starting to recognize my own power more in terms of relationship is through you.
Hmm.
Like your reflection of yourself and your reflection of me helps me to better understand my own power.
Hmm.
And part of what we were talking about yesterday, to again kind of circle back to that conversation about what we want our agreements to be going forward. It was about me stepping up more and what that looks like. Now, again, we'll talk about this a little bit more. We've touched on it a tiny bit, but we'll go deeper in future episodes about the fact that we have a blended family. You brought your 2 boys into this relationship, and we live in your home. Like, you already had this house before we got together too. So circumstantially, we've had a lot of conversations about how that not by any intention, but that kind of created a little bit of an unintentional power imbalance from the beginning, and how we get to co-create ways where that balances out in different ways. So there are little parts of me that when it comes to taking more leadership in this relationship, I sometimes hold back because I think it's not my home. I don't want to take over in that sense. And you actually want me to, not to take over, but you actually want me to step up more, and in a healthy leadership way. And that's what we're really looking at. And the example that you painted to me that I thought was so powerful was, every time you do your work and you bring on a new client, for example, like is there fear that comes up? Like, oh, like what if I don't get it right? What if I kind of like fuck up their life somehow or something? And I'm like, yeah. And I have always maintained that I take this work so seriously because I so recognize the power that I hold doing this work. People are bringing me their deepest, darkest stuff and asking me to help hold them through the moments in their life that are really pivotal and the relationships that are closest to their heart, and asking me to help them guide them through that. I take that really seriously because I recognize how much power I hold there.
Yeah.
And when you painted the work example, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm not quite recognizing how much power I hold in our relationship, in our marriage, and in our household, in our home, to take leadership. And that, yes, there might sometimes still be some fear of like, okay, I don't want to fuck it up, but it's a healthy fear because it's respect for how much this matters to me.
Yeah. 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 And I think, to contextualize that, the conversation was around, again, the fears that come up around taking responsibility, particularly when it's, it's my home, my kids, quote unquote, and all of that. And the idea of getting it wrong, that you really very vulnerably communicating that, there's a challenge and a concern that what if I mess it up?
What if I let you down?
Yeah. Yeah. And, what I was communicating is that I carry that every single day. I carry that, the possibility that I could let everybody down because everyone, many people are relying on me, right? And what would it look like if I let them down? And yet I think it's become clear over all the years and all the reps of doing it that doing nothing is going to let them down as well. And so to do nothing is to make a choice itself. And so I have this ongoing fear that will happen. And yet what I was saying is after time, it just becomes exciting. The practice of leaning into this unknown and figuring it out is very similar to when you take on a client and they've got these big problems and you don't know what's going to happen, but you get excited when you get a new client that's got a big problem, that you're like, you could completely drop them, but you feel confidence in your ability to do what you do. And so you've had the reps, that this could go really sideways, but you feel confident that it's not going to, and you move forward as though it's going to completely work out. And just that process is the process that actually ends up making it work out in many ways.
Yeah. And I also expressed to you, in a related conversation like a week or two ago, that I recognized that you hold so much and you hold so many people. And you have done so from such a ridiculously young age that you're looking for me as your partner to finally be the partnership where you can actually let it down. You can actually put it down, not permanently, just be able to put it down for a minute to lighten the load. And that's really important to me to fulfill that. And there have been, I think, a handful of moments where you have been able to do that more so with me, but I'm looking to create so much more of that with you. And in my own way. It's not going to look exactly like yours because it's not supposed to.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
You're getting really emotional there a minute ago.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Because I don't want to let you down.
Thank you. It was really beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. And in that, if you let me down, what would happen?
Sure, there's the possibility that that can push on an abandonment wound, like that you'll leave or anything like that. But ultimately, I just don't want to do that to you because you don't deserve it. Regardless of what happens to me or to our relationship.
Oh, I didn't actually mean it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, it's to me, it's that you deserve better than that. Being let down. And am I going to let you down over the course of this relationship? Of course I am. And I trust in both my and our ability to repair. But I don't want to disappoint you. And more importantly than that, but not for my sake, for yours. It's, to me, that is real love in a lot of ways. It's just wanting the best for the other person, regardless of your role in their life. And I don't want you to feel let down or disappointed. And I want you to have the safe space, hopefully with me, but just in general, I want you to have the space to feel that you can put it down and be held in that by me as your partner.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, part of it is knowing that I am going to let people down.
Yeah.
I'm going to let people down.
Accepting it.
It's going to be what happens when I make decisions. Somebody's not going to be happy. Somebody's going to be let down. And that's a heavy part of it. And I think there's a callous that, to a certain degree, that I build up by saying, look, sure, you're upset, but I made the decision. So get over it, move on. But I think
it's part of emotional boundaries.
It is. I mean, it's a fine balance between a boundary and a border, right?
Yeah.
But there's something in there around being open, and this is some of my own work that I'm dealing with right now, which is that rational part of myself that says, yeah, I made a mistake, but I made a choice, and I got it wrong. So what? And the callousness that can present to the other person of, I don't really feel, or I don't take responsibility, or I don't have any kind of reaction to that choice that had a negative impact on somebody else. And it's a delicate balance to walk, to hold that boundary of being a permeable membrane, to allow myself to take on, to hear the feedback that didn't work, that, you made this choice, without, at a point where I wasn't necessarily, it's wonderful when I can come to you and say, hey, is it this, or this, right? And you say, okay, I'll take this, and, we're together in that choice. Sometimes there's, when one partner might be dysregulated, or there's an ability to make a choice, you say, okay, well, I'll just make a choice for us, right? And then that choice doesn't work out, right? And so I can say, oh, well, I had to make a choice. You weren't communicating it, but you also could say, hey, that choice that you made, I had communicated earlier that I wouldn't like this, and then it ended up that way. how can I hear that? How can I hear that feedback and not take it personally, not go into my own inner child and say, well, F you, I had to make the choice, but how can I really be emotionally present as you just were? Finding that balance between being emotionally present with the fears, with the challenges, with not getting it right, while simultaneously not being stuck in the inability to make a decision.
Yeah. I appreciate your awareness around that, because I know that there have been, I can't think of a specific example or I'd share it, but I know that there have been moments where I have felt that with you. Just that feeling of, and then accuse you of not caring, and you do care a great deal. And I do know that. And the very logical and rational, even mostly the emotional part of me knows that. But there have been, a handful of instances where I felt that. So I appreciate your awareness around looking at that.
Boundaries and borders.
Baby.
Yeah. That's one of the big hallmarks in our relationships. Where, we've talked about this previously. I tend to be highly bordered. I had, can put up walls in many different ways. My favorite is the wall of words.
And boy, does he have many. Guys, you have no idea.
Professor Gardner comes out.
You mean lawyer, Professor Gardner.
Professor Lawyer Gardner, professor raised by two lawyers, will come out with a very detailed, long argument with clarity, absolute clarity on points A through Z.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just pulling out all the Zs for me.
Yeah, A through Z. For those non-Canadians, and keeping myself safe in the worst case. In the best case, I have a boundary and say, hey, this is, I hear what you're saying. I don't take that on. That's not mine. And here's what I need moving forward. And your tendency to be, I'll let you say it.
Oh yeah, my tendency to be too open. Like I take on too much. I am too permeable at times, and can be very thin-skinned in a way that is not beneficial to me or our relationship.
Emily's laughing because she decided the other day that she would do this feedback exercise with one of her groups, and
I was facilitating the exercise.
Yes, exactly. And so, being the leader that she is, she wanted to not just give the exercise, but do the exercise. And so she came to me for feedback, and boy, did she get it.
And I can take some harsh feedback. You threw me off because the very first question I had certain expectations. This is the danger of having expectations. Also, to clarify, you have facilitated this exercise hundreds of times, and you were the one who actually taught it to me. So I knew I was coming to the master. I actually questioned whether I wanted to come to you for feedback, but I am someone who can take very harsh feedback, just not necessarily quite as much from my husband. And I brought it to you in the very first question. It was, three words you would use to describe me. And everyone else had given me like complimentary words, because there were so many other questions on that exercise, which you knew about in advance, that are opportunities to offer where you can improve, weaknesses, all those things. And you choose to give me two complimentary words. And then the third one was thin-skinned. And I started off offended.
Her exact words were, do you want to rephrase that? And I just looked and laughed and said, no, I don't.
You're like, there's a method to my madness. And I was so pissed off with you. And then we had a beautiful conversation about it. Actually, it ended up being quite funny. We were dying laughing, but yeah.
Well, and that exercise is really, as I explained later on, designed to bring to awareness how I show up. And it's not about the feedback that we're getting.
No, it's not.
It's about how we're giving it. And I also realized, before that, I had a long career as being an actor, and various working in film, and you get really critical feedback all the time. And so, part of the job is, taking feedback in a certain way, being able to have a boundary where I'm hearing what's coming in, but also simultaneously just letting go of anything that doesn't serve. Like, really trying to hear the feedback, and not putting up a boundary and be like, you just don't know me, you don't get it, but being able to hear what's coming in, take it in and let it go. Take it in and let it go. If it's harsh, it's hard, what's the lesson that I can learn from that? And anything personal, it's not me, I can let it go. And where do we do that in relationship? With the people that we love the most, we're often the most critical. I'm often the most critical.
Yeah, that one's an eye, babe. No.
Well,
Not that I look, I have my moments too. I'm not trying to say otherwise. Yeah.
as I think we identified before, is I can be more critical towards the other. You can be more critical towards yourself.
Yes.
In relationship, right?
Yes.
And that's the dance that shows up for us. And what I mean is that we collectively can be the worst versions of ourselves with the people that we love the most. And so that's my worst. That's one of my worst versions is being hypercritical. I would say I'm just giving feedback.
Well, it's interesting. I worked as a model like in my as a teenager and early 20s, and I got some really harsh feedback a lot that I very quickly learned to not take it on, and I was really proud actually of that I could just brush it off. And my closest circle is very harsh with me. Like my two best friends in the world are incredibly harsh with me. But when it comes from you, it lands differently.
Why? What's there?
Because I love you the most. And because you are closest to me, you see into me in a way that even those closest to me don't quite in the same way. And I really highly value and I highly value and respect their opinions as well. But I perhaps give your words almost too much weight sometimes. And part of that is because of the respect that I have for you. That is an indication of the respect that I have for you and for your opinions.
Yeah. And this, I think, is true for every relationship, which is it's so easy to discard how someone sees or perceives me out there in the world. But in my most intimate relationship, how you see or perceive me is really, really important to whether I want to stay in this relationship. Because if the reflection that you give of me is not something that aligns with who I see myself as, then we're going to be at odds forever. So it calls into question the validity of the relationship at its core. If the version of me that you see is so off, that I just don't see that person at all, then that question's can I stay?
Yeah.
And so when I love someone very much, but also I think that I get into relationship because I'm looking for a reflection back of a version of myself that I like.
Yeah.
And if the version of myself that's being reflected is not the one that I like, more often than the one that I don't like, I'm not sure if I said that right, but basically I'm seeing a negative version of myself more frequently, then this isn't a reflection that I necessarily want to stay in.
And I know we need to wrap up, but what I will say to that is I have often said that the reflection, we fall in love initially with the version of ourselves that we see reflected to us through the other person's eyes. And when we referenced a few episodes ago about we had a moment at one point where we were like, oh my God, who did I marry? Like, this is not what I signed up for. I said to you that I don't like the version of myself that I'm seeing through you anymore. And I think that part of that for me in that moment was also, again, a lack of emotional boundaries on my part, where I was really heavily taking on your criticisms. We were in a tough spot anyway. We were having a lot of difficulties, and really trying to get to a place where we could be more harmonious. But that was the biggest indication to me internally of like, oh, there's something off here that we need to fix. And I still believed that we would be able to fix it. I didn't think that it was permanent, but I said that to you because I knew you would understand that if I'm feeling this way, we have some work to do, both together and individually, but that we needed to shift some things. And we did, and you did. And
so let's talk about the fixing. Let's wrap this up with the fixing.
Fixing. Yeah.
Right.
No one is inherently broken, but yes.
But no, I'm saying that fixing the dynamic, not the individual, but like, what is it that when we find ourselves in this space that the reflection of that we're seeing from the other is not the reflection that we want to see of ourselves. Sometimes we don't want to see the ugly sides of ourselves.
Sure, yeah.
But more to the point, it's become imbalanced in the way that I'm being perceived by the other and ultimately being reflected back. Sometimes that can be for controlling reasons. Sometimes that can be because there's just a lack of alignment in how we're showing up. What do we do in those moments?
I always come back to curiosity. How can I get curious about the person in front of me genuinely, not with judgments attached, not with all the assumptions that you already know everything they're going to say. If you ever reach a moment with the person in front of you where you feel that you know every single thing there is to know about them, love doesn't have a place to grow. Like at that point, you're either done or you're going to need to start to recognize within yourself that you don't actually know every single thing that there is to know about that person and start getting curious about them rather than coming from a place of judgments.
Yeah. Yeah. You stole mine. But I'd add on to that there's a very delicate balance, when I find myself in a situation where there's repeated behavior that is either crossing my own boundary or is not in partnership. How do I communicate that while simultaneously not taking apart my partner's self-image? How do I communicate that something's off, something's not working without hurting my partner's sense of self, which ultimately is not going to create the outcome that I'm looking for? And that is a really delicate, nuanced conversation. But, I come back to the Gottmans, the 5-to-1, right? And asking myself, are there ways to continue to deepen into the acknowledgments, the way of entering into the conversation that does not create a direct confrontation by delivering it with a little bit more sugar, and part of that sugar is not just making it sound good, but really acknowledging and seeing what my partner is bringing and leaning into those and giving my partner opportunities to win with the qualities that they do bring in a positive way, rather than setting them up continuously for the places that they're not.
Yeah, with genuine care and kindness too. And for anyone who doesn't know, the 5-to-1 that you refer to is like 5 positive interactions for every negative one. That's sort of your emotional bank account for the relationship. Yeah.
So when we're in these situations where our protectors are coming up, where we're striving to find the balance in our relationship, trying to communicate what's not working for me while simultaneously not putting up a wall, allowing myself to hear these things, one of the greatest things that we can do is to get curious, to really try to understand how this person sees the world.
I don't necessarily have to agree with it. I don't have to say, yep, that I see the world the same way. I just have to understand, and this is the key point, that it's reasonable that a person could see the world this way. Like that goes a long way. I don't necessarily see the world this way, but I can understand how you do. Goes a long way to just creating a level playing ground. When I'm stuck in the space of, I wouldn't do it that way. I don't understand how you would do it that way. There's no space for that other human being and their perspectives to exist.
Emotional validation goes such a long way. Look at the growth.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. And as always, there is room to grow.
There is room to grow, and this is love and practice.